We had great sponsors. And one of the principles I'm going to talk about today is DNA, right? DNA. So my task today is to talk about St. Croix, Alexander Hamilton, and opportunity zones. So all this has a great confluence I hope I can communicate to you about today. Well, so when we started Urban America, I had a very successful platform doing just fine. And John came to me and asked me if I would go to meet with him with a gentleman named Joe Flom. And Joe Flom was about 70 years old at that point. I didn't know who Joe was, but he said Joe's going to be his partner, and they wanted to get my perspective on investing in the inner city communities and communities of diversity that were lacking quality retail and quality healthcare and quality housing. And there was an opportunity to create an entity that would be a fiduciary to raise capital to invest in those communities. So I was passionate about that, so I went and met with Joe. I didn't really know who he was. Joe Flom was the founder, one of the founders of the largest law firm in the world, Skadden and Arps, Meagher and Flom. So we're sitting there talking, and I had been involved with very wealthy people before. I wasn't intimidated, but I was certainly impressed with his brain and his knowledge and his passion. And we talked about what this was all about. So I said, hey, great to meet you, see you later. So John called me a couple weeks later. He says, Richmond, Joe wanted to talk to you again. I said, about what? He said, well, they have some ideas. Would you come and talk to him again? So Joe, I went over and said, okay, fine. They offered me the job as the CEO of this company. Now, I was doing just fine. I wasn't really interested. But when they told me who else were going to be the partners, I said, I better stop a minute and slow down. Because the partner was going to be Ken Chenault, who was the chairman of American Express at the time, Dick Parsons, who'd been chairman of Citicorp and Time Warner, and a whole bunch of other really significant investment bankers. And I realized if you get that opportunity to be in a room or be in partnership with those people, something might be happening. So DNA stands for your designated natural assignment, okay? And what I learned from that principle, because I've seen it in my life many times, that when a big change starts to happen in your life, it happens suddenly. You start hearing the same thing over and over and over. And then you recognize that the resources or the relationships that you need are all of a sudden there. And the only thing you have to do is to move. And so Alexander Hamilton had a designated natural assignment. He grew up in the Caribbean, island of St. Kitts, had a difficult family. His father was to whore around with a lot of women, and he had difficulty because of that. And later in his life, some of that manifested in his life as well. But he was very brilliant. And the in-laws in his family were involved in slavery. And he watched how they worked to manage slavery. But he was a very financially astute gentleman, tremendous manager. And he left St. Croix when he was born in 1775. He left there when he was 12 years old, after a big hurricane came in and blew the island apart. And he migrated to Boston. And as fate would have it, he has a designated natural assignment. He ultimately met up with George Washington when they were getting the British out of this great country. And he was one of the people that signed the Constitution. He was brilliant. In the Caribbean, they had really set up a democratic government of rule and how it worked. They had a president or a governor, they had a Congress, and they had a treasury. So when they sat down to write the Constitution, Alexander Hamilton shared that architecture, and that was the foundation of our country, which is being challenged today, but it's been challenged all the time. It'll survive, yes? So my point is, so he had an assignment to come all the way from the Caribbean. He left there under stress, under duress, alone, and never returned his entire life. Never got back there. But he had a purpose in going to America, which wasn't the United States yet. He had another purpose, not so glorious, I'm afraid. His purpose was, because he had been involved in the slavery business, he was one of many who taught the American slave owners how to manage the slave labor. And much of that fruit is still with us today, unfortunately. But God will use who he's going to use for whatever he wants to use it for. So some